If you like this video, please support my channel by clicking on the link in the description and going to HL Supply. They sponsor OPEforum.com. You can buy parts through HL Supply, and please join the discussion at OPEforum.com. If you have any questions, you can always leave them in the comments. If something's a little more specific, broad, general, whatever, sometimes it's better just to leave them in at OPE Forum, and you'll get your question answered. So what we're going to do today is make a 044, or rather Stihl 440, or a Chinese copy of an 044 440, whatever you want to call it. What we got first up is the case. Yes, this is another one of those kit saws. So it comes as a kit, and you know, Walt is always saying how these things are moving targets, so we don't really know exactly what you're going to get when you open these things up. So this is a Stihl 440 or 044 clone, theoretically, and I have never put together an 044 before. So I've done the 660 and the 360 now. This is the middle saw between the two as far as size goes, and I'm kind of hoping it's at least sort of similar. Never done this before, so we go on an adventure per usual. See if we can get this thing together, see if it pops. Maybe a few mods here and there. Any of the modifications, obviously, you don't have to do, but let's try to take you through the steps of building such a saw and how I approach seeing something new for the first time. Obviously, I've put a lot of cases together, but this will be my first 440. So, open this up, comes with a gasket. I don't usually like these gaskets. What I do like is getting a gasket kit, preferably from HL Supply. I don't trust the seals that are already installed in here. That's one issue. Secondly, sometimes the kit doesn't come with the heat tape, so if you want that. Thirdly, there have been issues with the stock gaskets, supposedly, so I use this one. So it comes as a nice kit. You can, seals, everything. It's all right here. Let's see what we got. So right off the bat, what I notice is that it's got a little bit of corrosion here, so we can just polish that off with my steel wheel. And then the other thing about the 440 that at least is noticeable to me is that this seal is tiny. That is small. Comes apart nice. Oh, that does go through. The positioning pin does actually go through, so we're not going to want to put it there. You're going to want to put it in the flywheel side first. Oh, and it goes through here too. So just pushing on it comes right through. So also you're going to want to make sure that those don't fall out, so we're going to hit them with a dab of 1184 when we get this whole thing together. Now, I did have an issue with the 036 I put together. The bearing here was actually too far that way. I've had some that are too far this way. So let's get that figured pretty close to right off the bat. The other thing we want to do is when we pull this whole thing together, we want to make sure that the crank is centered between the two bosses. So this boss here and this boss here. In order to do that, we need to put these two together with that gasket and take a measurement. Take your positioning pins, push them out, and put them here. And they're so tight that there's actually pressure in there. Gasket comes out. Keep these seals off to the side. We will use them later. I like my metal trays. And actually, let's be smart. Let's be smart. You can put this in here and put the case halves together and measure between the bosses, or just measure between the bosses. So let's measure here. That's not going to let me do it. So we're going to have to do it visually. So unfortunately this flange here messes up my measurement. I'm sure somebody's got a better trick than this. 1.157, 1.158. We're going to add this because it's going to make it further apart. 25 thousandths. 1.157 plus 0.025 equals 1.182. And now we're going to grab the crank, measure between the lobes, 1.087. So we subtract 1.087 and we get 0.095. We're going to divide that by 2. So with the gasket in there, we're going to have 47, roughly 47, 48 thousandths space on either side. Now, that's actually quite a bit, but whatever. 47.5 thousandths. So now we need to make a shim that's 47.5 thousandths. Take my positioning pins out just to hold them. Let's take out the seals. You do not want to scratch the case because this seal seals from the metal part of the seal up against the case. So I just go in with my tool, I grab just the metal, pop. Now, said this before, say it again, there are some guys that want to reuse these after. I wouldn't suggest it, especially because when you lift a seal up like that, often you bugger this ring that's in there. There's a circular spring, and if you bugger that, it's not going to hold vacuum. So that gets tossed. My opinion, just the way I do it. It's another reason why it helps to have a set like this, if you're going to do it like I do. And then on this guy, let's use actually a bigger screwdriver. Now here, the sealing surface is actually the bearing. So the metal here seals up against the metal part of the bearing. Again, a couple of reasons why I'm getting rid of the seals. Number one, I don't trust them. Number two, when you're trying to put the crank through the bearing, and you're kind of counting on that seal to seal at the same time, sometimes there's a lip on the crank that can catch, and if it catches and inverts the rubber, then that spring on the inside of the seal just pops right out, and again the saw won't hold vacuum. But you won't know until you do the pressure and vac test. In my mind, it's just not predictable to put the whole thing together reliably if the seals are in there. So might as well have good seals and then put the seals in after the crank is in there. Let's get the oiler and see how far off we are there. Here's the oiler. So this bearing, we don't want the bearing too far in because that will interfere with us centering the crank. And we don't want the lip of the bearing too far out because that interferes with the oiler. Actually, you can measure this from a couple of places. The outer stop here, 34 thousandths. I'll bet this is more like 50, 60. So this bearing is pushed too far this direction. So we need to actually move the bearing a little bit that way. How to do that? On the 036 video, I just tap this with a punch, and you tap only on the outer race, and you do move it. Not too super excited to do it that way. So let's see if we can do it another way. Let's put our case halves back together. No need for the positioners, really, for what we're going to do. Need a piece of 1/2 inch threaded rod. Actually, this is shorter, so I'll use this piece. Some nuts and a bunch of different size washers. And this is going to have to be guess and check method. You want the washer to cover the outer race on the bearing. Just some washers on the other side to stiffen the whole thing up and grab appropriately. So this is going to squeeze, and we're pushing on this side just on the case, which pushes on the case, which then pulls on the bearing. You can do this with pretty much any type of wrench. There it goes. Another way to do this, heat it. Drop the bearing out, put the oiler in, drop the bearing back in. Done. Lots of different ways you can do it. Need to move it about 30 thousandths. So let's reverse it and see what happens. $75. 78. So now there's 3 thousandths play there. Now if you wanted to get really picky, this looks a lot like the 372 oiler setup. It's not exact, but suspiciously close. Yeah, so now we have an oiler that's going to sit down proper. Now, if you want to get completely nuts, let's get completely nuts. Let's say you overdid it. Too far. Too far. Okay, you overdid it. Now what? Grab your oiler bolts. Are these through-hole bolts? They are not. There is no particular hole into the crankcase. These kits are really nice because, at least in some of them, they label stuff for you. So the oil pump screws, M4 by 12. And you don't want anything longer than that. Screw them down. Reasonable tight. So yeah, let's see, maybe the bearing moved too far this way. Get it to go back the other direction. That isn't that hard. Washer on. Just some washers extra for stiffening. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put pressure against the oiler, which actually has quite a bit of metal, and the entire bearing. It would be nice to put just pressure against the outer race, but here it won't matter because if you're just pressing all at the same time, then you're really not putting lateral force on the bearing itself. You're not putting lateral force between the races, would be a better way to put it. So now what you can do is just take this and tighten it down until it stops. And now the oiler and the bearing are actually mated effectively. And you don't push hard. This doesn't take lots of force. It will stop, and then that's it. Don't do any more. I'm going to take the oiler back off for the moment. Don't really need that on there right now. So now that we have that in the right spot, now we have the bearing in the right spot because it's seated up against the oiler. So no matter what measurements you do, as long as it's seated up against it, and the oiler sits down fine. That's it. That's all you need. Back to our shim. We need a 48 thousandths, 47 and a half, 48 thousandths shim, roughly. Let's take a HL Supply business card, fold it in half, 30 thousandths roughly. Fold it again, 45 thousandths. So with a piece of tape on top of there, that'll be perfect. Now we're going to take our shim. It's aluminum tape, just because it's what I have. Aluminum tape's about 3/1000 thick, so 45 and 3 is going to be exactly what we need. Our shim goes right there, just taped on. That way when the crank lobe gets there, it stops. Let's quickly hit the corrosion here while it's easiest to get to. Just a wire wheel on my Dremel. Shines up right nice. A little bit of pitting, but that won't matter. I just want this shiny. Clean and shiny. And while we're being picky, let's do the other side too. If you want to be really picky, cover the bearings with some tape. I love how this thing shines things up. Very nice. Now you can look on these surfaces too. These surfaces here. But, you know, just looking at it, it looks pretty clean. I'm not going to worry about it. What I am going to do is I'm going to brake clean all those surfaces before I try to attach anything, any type of sealer. Might as well do the brake cleaner now. Just want to get any oils off. Especially if you're going to use sealer, which you don't have to do, but I do. So now we get the PTO side gooped up. While the flywheel side is skinning up. More is not better. Just want to make sure that this is all going to be sealed, that's all. Good. So we're going to let that skin for just a minute. So let's get our gasket. I like to put the gasket on the side with the positioning pins. Make sure all the holes are lined up. That way you don't have any issues. Now that this is skinned up for a minute, our positioning pins are in, and they're in the side where they bottom out. Now we can bring these two case halves together. The positioning pins are absolutely crucial to get lined up. There's no way around it. They have to be lined up. And if they're not, bad things. So now we have this side to contend with. Now this particular saw has a tiny seal. So you need a tiny adapter, which I do have now. And the flywheel side is actually M8. So I actually am going to slide this in just like that. I just want to make sure that this is a little bit out of order, but I want to make sure the sleeve is seated. Good. Which it is. And then we're going to attach the handle. By the way, this saw is like the real test of this kit because of that silly flywheel side seal. So the handle goes in, just like that. I don't happen to have a washer on me, but here's the nut. Just by hand, get everything lined up. I happen to have a gear wrench that fits. They both should kind of be loosey-goosey, and you just turn it. Wow, that's brilliant. Just going together perfect. What a great test. This is just absolute cake. Make sure, yeah, gotta make sure the positioning pins are in. If the positioning pins are in, you're good. That's it. That's it. Don't press any harder. You might ruin something. Back it off. So the nut comes off. Handle. Sleeve. Threaded rod. And now you have a case where your crank is perfectly centered without having to hit it with a hammer. Stop using hammers. I don't care if it's a copper hammer. Still a hammer. Anyway, pet peeve. Keep going. You press on. That's fantastic. I love this. This is great. Wow, how cool is that? How simple and easy was that? This is the hardest thing to do, by the way. This is the hardest thing. Right here. It's done. Get some bolts. Put them in. Good enough. Alright. Crankcase bolts. Let's look for those. M5 by 20 for crankcase. Labeled. That's nice. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if there's a question, all you got to do is look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2 positioning pins. So you know you got it at that point. Tighten them down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's perfect. It's perfect. Leave it. Don't touch it. It's fine. Take the tabs off with a razor. Flat if you can. Nice and flat. This is Brad Snelling's technique. Always credit where credit's due. Best I know how. Tabs are off. Last thing, seals. So let's do the flywheel side first. This is so tight. Normally I like to get some brake cleaner in there to clean that. It's going to be difficult to even put a Q-tip in there. So I'm going to either use the opposite end of a Q-tip. I'm going to go around that way. Oh, I even got some there. Just want to make sure that the sealing surfaces are indeed clean. Is there a stop? No, there is not. So the stop is the bearing. So we don't want to press it all the way down to the bearing. Nice thing about the flywheel side here is that there is a taper, so you do not have to use the Coke can trick to get this right. I use a little bit of anaerobic sealer on this. This happens to be Loctite 518. For this, you probably don't need it, but again, we'll do it anyway. If you want, double, triple check that there's the spring inside there. Place it on down, and then tap it until it's flush with the body. Hey, that socket will work perfect. Almost. Looks pretty good to me. Still spins nice. That's great. Okay, let's do this side. Same idea. Brake cleaner and a Q-tip. Think that's dirty? Yeah, you pick up some dirt. Anaerobic. Aha! For this one, you do not need to use the Coke can trick until you get to the bushing part. So this has the same, basically the same wonky bushing setup as the Husky 372. Deep socket. Make sure it's on the metal all the way around. Tap her on down. There. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my 1184 and I'm going to cover these silly positioning pins just with a dab of it. I don't need much. But you take a dab of your 1184 and you go down and you cover your positioning pin. That way if it gets a hankering to move, it doesn't. Yeah, because the rest of this is 1184 together. I really doubt that's going to happen. And having a positioning pin down here move is not a big deal. If this one falls out, so what? But if that one falls out and gets into the works here, you can ruin a clutch. No good. I'm going to credit, I think it's Charles Briscoe for that idea on YouTube. I know he had that issue with the 660. I think it messed him up good. It actually fell out. Now odds are, because we use sealer internally, that that wouldn't happen, but you know, you never know. So that's the crankcase. That's the assembly. That's the hardest part. There it is, right there, it's done. So I'm going to stop the video here, and we're going to get to the cylinder head next. This is ready to try in a cylinder head. Again, if you like this video, please support my channel by going to the link in the description for HL Supply if you need any aftermarket parts. Also, please come check us out at opeforum.com and join the discussion there, especially if you have any questions or anything like that. Stay tuned for the full build on this. Obviously, I'm going to put the whole thing together, maybe do some poor man's porting on it, and see what we can actually get out of it. My intention is not to do lots of R&D into figuring out how to get optimal power out of it, but just to give it a little bit extra and get it to pop. And if I can do that, we'll be successful. At least I will consider it successful. So, thank you so much for watching the video. Stay tuned for the next parts on how to put the rest of it together. Don't forget to subscribe.